Right. Everybody hear me? Good morning, everyone. So I feel quite humiliated that as chair I'm late, but I was being asked a few questions by the BBC, so good of them to ask. So, good morning, everyone. Great to see so many folk around. I apologise in advance that I've had a little bit of a throat infection for the last 10 days or so I sound worse than normal. But the bad news for you all is that my voice stays. It just doesn't go away completely, so you're going to have to put up with that. So, for those that don't know, my name is Neil Shand. I'm Chief Executive of the National Beef Association, and this is our event that we're hosting here, obviously, at Darlington Market. And we're very pleased that the market have offered this facility, which I think you'll all agree is second to none, and a great advert for what can be done with a go-ahead board of directors, etc. So, you've not come here to listen to me speaking, that's for sure. So I will introduce the speakers. Firstly, on my left, I have Jude Caper. So Jude is also one of our board members, but has several other roles. She's an independent livestock sustainability consultant and is also the chair and professor of the Sustainable Beef and Sheep Systems at Harper Adams. So I'm going to do this to everyone. I don't know if they did it the last time, but I'm going to do it. So would you give a round of applause, please, just to welcome Jude on board. My policy in these things to clap at the start in case you don't do it at the end. So on my far right, I have got Sophie Throup, who is the Head of Agriculture at Morrison's. And while I have got the mic and the chair, I think we should all thank Morrison's for their support of our industry, not only during the pandemic, but in general. So I will give Sophie a very special welcome. And then to my immediate right, I've got Professor Alice Stanton. So Alice is a Professor of Cardiovascular Pharmacology, easy for me to say without a sore throat, at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and is also the Director of Human Health at Devenish Nutrition. I'm not going to tell you what they're going to talk about because they're going to tell you themselves, but I think Alice is going to tell us about the benefits and the value of red meat in a balanced diet and how it does more good than harm, basically, is how I'll put it. So, I've got no more to say. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, and I'm going to hand over to Jude.
Thank you very much. Hoping you can hear me. I think you can. It's echoing. So it is an absolute pleasure to be here. Those of you who've met me or heard me talk in the past know that I could talk for about 3.5 days and never draw breath on this topic. It really is something that I'm massively passionate about. And honestly, I think that all of us in the industry need to be really passionate about this topic because compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when it was a buzzword and there was only some people talking about it, this sustainability issue really isn't going to go away. So I'm going to do a very quick few minutes on the environmental aspects here. So when we talk about sustainability, it does mean different things to different people, and there are almost as many definitions of sustainable beef, sustainable food, sustainable lives as there are people in the UK. So to every individual person, it's going to mean something a little bit differently. But when we talk about cattle systems and also sheep systems as well, we've got to think about it as a balance. So in this instance, when I'm talking about sustainability, it isn't a particular system, it isn't a particular breed, it isn't only cattle systems in Darlington or in Somerset or anywhere else in the world. It's about balancing three things on your operation in your business. So it's a balance between environmental responsibility, economic viability and social acceptability. And I'm going to focus on the environment, but I think we all need to keep in our minds, and I know this will be touched on a bit later on as well, that the social aspect is increasingly important because we can't ignore what our children or our grandchildren are going to want to eat and want to buy in 10, 20, 30 years' time. So we've got to think about that social aspect as well. So we've got to balance all of those three factors, and that's why I say that there's no one-size-fits-all. There's no if you just have a herd of Angus cows, or if you just feed this particular feed, or if you just have this particular tractor. Yeah, it entirely depends on the restrictions and the opportunities that you have with your system. So if we think about the carbon footprint, which tends to be the focus of what most people are thinking about, including government, when it comes to sustainability, we know that on a global basis, the UK, which here would be under the banner of Western Europe is doing pretty well. So the global average out there on the right-hand side is 47 kilos of carbon per kilo of deadweight beef. We've got Western Europe, where we're placed, down at 18, so that's about 60% lower than the global average. We've got North America, by comparison, there at 29, and if we go far out to the right-hand side, we've got Latin America and South Asia at about 73. So we can see there's huge global variation, and that's where we face a particular challenge, because often when we see figures relating to the carbon footprint of beef, that's given on a global basis, and there is no global average beef system. There isn't even an English average beef system or a UK average beef system. Every system is different, but as you can see, in the UK, we are doing pretty well compared to that global average. And this is really old data, and I apologise for that, but one of my biggest bugbears is that we don't have a UK carbon footprint for beef per se. But if we look at beef and for lamb, I say this is really old data, and you can tell it is because it came out from eBlex back in 2012, but we still see the same trends now, and that is to say that you've got the average carbon footprints there in the blue, but look at the size of the green bars, which are the best carbon footprints, and the yellow bars, which are the worst. My point is here, there's massive variation across the UK, and that means we have opportunities, because where we've got an awful lot of change between systems, we have an awful lot of opportunities to change as well, which means we can improve. So to just give you one example here, if we look at it from a scientific point of view, anything that we can do in any system to improve productivity is going to give us some benefits. So, for example, if we improve growth rate, if we improve meat yield, or of course in dairy cattle, if we improve milk yield, we're going to need fewer total cattle and or less total time to make the same amount of meat. And if we need less animals, then we need less land, less water, less greenhouse gases, lower carbon footprint, and we should have a lower economic cost of production. But as I say, there is no one-size-fits-all. So what you do on your farm might be very different to what everybody else does on the next farm, in the next county, in the next country even. So we've always got different opportunities depending what you do in your farm operation. So to give you one quick example, and as you may know, as the MBA, we put out some information almost 2 years ago now, looking at the impacts if we cut age at slaughter, because the average age in slaughter in the UK is still hovering somewhere around 26 months or so. But we've got a sort of long tail on the end of that of cattle that are still being slaughtered over 30 months. And in some cases, there's very good reasons for that. But in some cases, we could improve. So as an illustration here, we've got two cattle, both exactly the same at birth, 40 kilos at birth. They're both slaughtered at 670 kilos. That means over that time from birth to slaughter, they obviously gain 630 kilos. But what differs is that one's slaughtered at 30 months and one's slaughtered at 27 months. So fairly obviously, the one that's slaughtered at 27 months has to grow faster. But what's really important here is that they save those, one of my slides disappeared. They save 3 months of land, of water, of feed, and of carbon footprint. So they're going to have a carbon footprint of somewhere between about 10 to 20% lower just for that beef animal, because those 3 months that they save are when they are at their biggest, and so they're eating more and they've got a higher carbon footprint per day. So again, anything that we do on any operation, no matter how extensive, no matter where it's based in the UK, this isn't about taking all the sucklers off the hills and putting everything into an intensive shed. But I think we all know that on any farm, there's always areas where we can improve, whether it's reproduction, whether it's pasture management, whether it's health, whether it's welfare, whether it's breeding, anything that we can all do on all of our operations to get better, to meet our key performance indicators and to meet our targets. And that's why I say there is no one size fits all. It entirely depends on what you do on your operation, where you can become better in terms of production and therefore become as well, hopefully, more profitable going forwards. But we do face a challenge, and a bit of the elephant in the room, I think, is that we've seen a move, generally speaking, towards dairy crosses. Certainly, a lot of the processors and the retailers have realised the benefits in terms of dairy cross beef, in terms of a lower carbon footprint. And that's simply because of accounting. We can attribute some of the resources and some of the greenhouse gas emissions from the dairy cross animal back to the dairy cow. And that means as a suckler industry, we're under even more pressure. We've got to get better about talking of the benefits of suckler cattle as well. Because, and I'm a complete data nerd, but I did the calculations, if you've got one sort of average suckler cow, on an annual basis, she's going to eat almost 4,000 kilos of feed dry matter. She's going to use about 20,000 litres of water, and in terms of her carbon footprint, it's going to be about 2.5 tonnes of carbon. So we've got to talk about all of the other benefits that suckler cows give us as well to maintain a profitable, thriving suckler industry. So, for example, we know that we can't grow cattle and sheep everywhere in the country or even in the world. And 60% of the land that we have in the UK can't be used profitably for anything but pasture. So there's a huge role of grazing livestock in these areas. This picture, for example, was taken up near Glencoe in Scotland about 2 years ago now. We've got huge benefits in terms of biodiversity, in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of landscape maintenance, in terms of wildlife, all those benefits that suckler cattle give us as well. But we've got to have a good PR story around that to talk to the consumer, so the focus doesn't just become carbon, 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 because environmental responsibility is bigger than just carbon. We've got to think about all the other aspects as well. 2 more slides. The first one being my biggest bugbear, and that is that we all need a carbon footprint, whether we want to or not, frankly, but we need a standard tool across the industry. There are lots of tools out there. They do brilliant things, but they all do slightly different things with slightly different inputs, slightly different outputs. We need a standard tool so that we can compare between farms, between breeds, between herds, between counties, etc. And at the moment, we don't have a standard tool. And ultimately, as I say, it isn't about you must have this breed, you must have this tractor, you must be based in Durham or Carlisle or wherever it might be. As I say to my daughter, who's over there on her iPad because she's heard my talks far too many times, on the left-hand side, you've got a picture of her at her first day at rugby tots back when she was 2.5, and on the right-hand side, you've got her as the team captain about 6 months ago now. You don't have to be the biggest, you don't have to be the brightest, but you do have to do your best on your operation. And if we improve on every operation across the UK in whatever way that means for health, for welfare, for productivity, repro, nutrition, then we can all be more productive, be more profitable, and cut our carbon footprints as well. So you've got my email address here, and I'll be very pleased to take questions in the Q&A for the panel later. So thank you so much.
Right, Jude, thank you very much. So we'll let all the speakers speak, and we'll do the Q&A at the end. I need to apologise to Alice because I forgot to get everyone to give her a very round warm of applause to welcome her to the North East. So can we please do that now? That was just my haste to get started after being late. So Alice, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hopefully the round of applause won't be just at the beginning, and you might appreciate my talk and give a clap afterwards. So what I'm going to talk about is how much red meat is good for us, and in doing those calculations, I'm going to emphasize the need for transparent, evidence-based health metrics. We need reliable data in order to make those estimations. Exactly as for Jude's calculation of sustainability, you need accurate data. And some of the information that's been put forward in the medical literature, which we should be able to trust, is not accurate. My disclosures. I'm going to remind you of what is the role of food, and it's to provide a healthy diet for humans. And it needs to do two things. It needs to protect against malnutrition in all its forms, and it needs to protect against the diseases of excess, the non-communicable diseases like heart attacks, strokes, and cancers. And we're not doing very well worldwide. In a world population of 7.5 billion, we still have almost 1 billion who are undernourished, who go to bed hungry, who don't get sufficient calories to be able to function. And we also, and we know it, we have 2 billion, almost 2 billion, who are overweight or obese, and therefore are at risk of those non-communicable diseases. What is not as well recognised is we have another 2 billion who actually demonstrate hidden hunger. So while they get enough calories, their diet is not adequate qualitatively. In particular, they are deficient in the essential amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein, of essential fatty acids such as the omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, and of key minerals and vitamins. So what's the role of animal source foods? So meat, milk, dairy, and fish in providing those essential nutrients. If you look at the left-hand panel, you see a range of foods arranged in order about how well they provide the critically or commonly lacking nutrients, the vitamins and minerals that are most commonly deficient. So things like iron, vitamin B12, folate, vitamin D. The top 14 out of the top 15 in providing those commonly lacking nutrients are animal source food, are meat, dairy, and fish. And if you look at the right-hand panel, you see that actually what's plotted in each of those plots is, on the horizontal axis, is the percentage of calories that comes from animal source foods, and on the vertical axis is the likelihood of being deficient in common nutrients. The middle panel shows the vitamin deficiencies. The far right panel shows the mineral deficiencies, the calcium, the iron, the zinc. If diets across countries are less than 30% derived from animal source foods, you are increasingly likely to have those deficiencies, up to 80–90% deficient where animal source foods are less than 5%. This is really important. One of the worst outcomes from malnutrition, from hidden hunger, is childhood stunting. Now, childhood stunting is not just small children, it's children who do not reach their potential physically or mentally. They are weaker, their brains are less well developed, they are less able to engage in schools, they achieve less well cognitively, their career options are worse, therefore their income opportunities later on are worse, and then you get a vicious circle where they are less able to provide for their children, so their children are more likely to be stunted into the future. The top left panel shows where the prevalence of stunting worldwide, and you can see the pink coded countries is where childhood stunting is greater than 30%. So 1 in 3 children are stunted in sub-Saharan Africa and in India and Southeast Asia. They are the exact same countries where meat eating, dairy eating, and seafood eating is at its least. So therefore, I'm really concerned about the numbers of recent publications that suggest that animal source foods are contributing more to disease burden than they are benefiting. I'm going to focus in on one recent publication. It's the Global Burden of Disease Risk Factors publication, a 2019 analysis, which was published in The Lancet in 2020. And I'm going to focus on this because, in actual fact, it's their data that are used by all of the other publications, including the Lancet used Global Burden of Disease data. It used the 2017 data rather than 2019 data. It'll use, the next version of Lancet will use the 2019 data unless this is challenged. So the Global Burden of Disease are a worldwide collaboration led from the University of Washington in Seattle from an institute called the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. They are hugely influential. So their data and analysis are quoted by the United Nations, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the European Commission, yet Farm to Fork used their data. The National Food Strategy for England recently used their data. They used the 2019 data, which is unreliable. And Eat Lancet does use their data. They're not shy. They actually self-describe themselves as the de facto source of global health accounting. They are hugely influential. So this is a slightly complicated study or slide, but I'm going to use it in a couple of to make a couple of comments. What it shows are the relationship between dietary risks and deaths. And dietary risks have actually taken over from smoking as being a greater cause of deaths and illnesses worldwide. So more important than smoking for the last 10 years. At the top of this slide are the excesses. So high body mass index and diets high in salt are the leading excessive risk factors that cause deaths and illnesses worldwide. And then lower down are the deficiencies, and you can see child and maternal malnutrition with resultant childhood stunting is at the top of that, and then diets low in whole grains, diets low in fruits. The 2017 analysis is in blue columns and the 2019 analysis is in red. And right to the right, you can see the ratio between the 2019 and 2017 data. And there's been huge numbers of changes. So many things have doubled or more, and many things have halved with the 2019 analysis. Looking at diets low in milk, in actual fact, this was underestimated in both the 2017 and the 2019 analysis. They only counted the protection that dairy offers against colon cancer. Yes, 1, 2, or 3 portions of dairy per day provides increasing protection against colon cancer. They omitted that actually 3 portions of dairy per day also protects against heart attacks and strokes. That's not counted. Likewise, you can see that actually they've redistributed that diets low in calcium and diets low in vitamin D are also bad for you, and they've given that a separate column, whereas dairy is one of the richest sources of calcium and vitamin D. So a gross underestimate. Omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, which come from oily fish, they only counted the protection against heart attacks and strokes. They omitted the wonderful protection of the brain, both in youth for brain development and in adulthood and the elderly against psychiatric diseases and also Alzheimer's dementia. And in fact, in the 2019 analysis, they've reduced that benefit by 80%. without any explanation, without providing any evidence whatsoever. But what I want to focus on for the rest of this talk is what they did concerning red meat. In 2017, excessive red meat consumption, eating red meat every day, was adjudged to cause 25,000 deaths globally. A very small amount. It was the least important of all of these 21 dietary risk factors. That increased dramatically to almost 900,000 deaths globally in the 2019 analysis, without any explanation. They now say that they have evidence that in fact, any red meat eating from the first mouthful is actually causing not only colon cancer, also breast cancer, not only diabetes mellitus, but also causing heart attacks, hemorrhagic strokes, ischemic strokes, and subarachnoid hemorrhage. They haven't provided any evidence whatsoever. They say they did their own systematic reviews, black box estimate, and they produced this data. On the left is a panel which comes from the Global Burden of Disease 2019 analysis. They added up all of the deaths due to heart attacks, strokes, colon cancer, breast cancer, and they said that actually from eating 5 grams of red meat per day, that would give you 35 grams a week, come to about, you'd actually be allowed a steak a month, and you actually will be causing death with that amount. So from the first mouthful of red meat, deaths are caused, you are putting yourself at risk, is what the Global Burden of Disease 2019 analysis. This is model data without any evidence whatsoever being produced into the public domain. On the right-hand side is a really large multinational study conducted from McMaster University, conducted in 21 countries worldwide, countries of low income, medium income, high income, and in fact, for the same intake of red meat, there's a trend towards protection from death. This is real data. Which would you believe? Because of our concern about the Global Burden of Disease 2019 analysis, 6 of us got together, 6 professors from 6 different universities from Ireland, the UK, Belgium, and Australia, and we sent a letter into the Lancet, who published the Global Burden of Disease 2019 analysis, and we asked 2 key questions. Now, it took us 9 months to get our letter published by the Lancet. We initially were refused, and then only when some investigative journalists got interested and published in the Grocer Journal and asked questions, did the Lancet actually say, actually, we've had a closer look at your letter and we would like to publish. It took another 3 months for it to be published. Our key questions were, where's the evidence? Where's the peer-reviewed publications of the new systematic reviews of Global Burden of Disease 2019 that are in compliance with the protocols and procedures that are required for systematic reviews, the PRISMA statement, and for reporting of global health metrics, the Gather statement, which the Lancet have absolutely signed up to and require for their published papers. Where is the evidence that justifies the updated dose-response curves for the relationship between red meat and all of these various adverse outcomes? And where's the evidence for a red meat TMREL, that's the optimal intake of red meat, being 0 grams per day? And, importantly, have the additional deaths and DALYs, that's disability-adjusted life years, it's a measure of illness, have the additional deaths and DALYs that would result from a TMREL of 0 on iron deficiency anemia sarcopenia, that's weakness or fragility of the elderly, and child and maternal malnutrition being included in the estimates. So has the good of moderate red meat consumption been included in the estimates? Initially, the Global Burden of Disease collaborators, led by Professor Christopher Murray from the University of Washington, was not contactable, actually, to answer our letter. Then they said, no, we won't respond. And then when we asked, well, will a statement alongside our letter be placed in the Lancet saying that the authors are refusing to answer our questions, they actually said they would respond, and then they changed their mind again, and then they changed their mind again. So 3 weeks after our letter was published, a response was produced. In that, they actually said, yeah, in fact, red meat doesn't cause hemorrhagic stroke. It actually protects against hemorrhagic stroke, so that's an error. They said that the strength of evidence regarding any relationship between red meat and adverse outcomes was relatively weak, and that actually they'd get it right in future estimates, in future reports, future publications. These are errors. It is standard procedure that if you have errors in your publications, you correct them immediately. Given that this publication, the Global Burden of Disease 2019 analysis, has actually been cited or quoted in up to 1,000 papers at this stage. So we cannot let errors be propagated. They still didn't answer our key questions. They haven't produced the evidence. They are refusing to include the damage that will occur to malnutrition within their analysis. So the evidence underlying their estimates must be made public immediately. There's been considerable media and scientific interest, initially from the agri-food sector journalism, but we did get an article in the Times. Scientists see red over research on meat's health risks, and there's been huge activity amongst social media. And I'm going to highlight one, which comes from Gordon Guyatt, who is one of the founders of evidence-based medicine, a professor from McMaster University in Canada. And I'll highlight his comment, his final comment in the tweet: calls for evidence remain unanswered even in latest author's response. Big problem. It's a big problem for evidence-based medicine and for the credibility of clinical science. Now, could we do without animal source foods? What about the plant-based meat and dairy alternatives? Now, unfortunately, what's currently available is in large part ultra-processed food, high in sugars, salt, and multiple cosmetic additives, chemicals. Lord knows what they're doing to our bodies. So look at Beyond Meat burger. It has the same protein content as steak, but 5 times the salt. Jackfruit and mushroom products are even worse. Much more sugar and salt, multiple additives, and actually less than 20% of the protein of meat. Unsweetened almond milk. You should not feed that to your children. Twice the salt, 1/8 the protein, and 1/4 the zinc. All needed for good brain development. This comes from Stefan Van Vliet from Duke University, and what he says is, and there is lots of agreement amongst the nutritional world, the mimicking of animal foods using isolated plant proteins, fats, vitamins and minerals likely underestimates the true nutritional complexity of whole foods in their natural state. Novel plant-based meat and dairy alternatives should be treated as alternatives in terms of sensory experience, that's in terms of taste and enjoyment, but not as true replacements in terms of nutrition. So you can eat them occasionally for fun, but really they should not be any kind of large part of a healthy diet. The relationship between red meat and disease burden is mirror J-shaped. If you don't have meat in your diet and you don't replace it adequately and expertly with sufficient other nutritious food, you are very likely to be malnourished. There is some evidence that relatively small deleterious effects occur with consumption of excessive red meat, and particularly processed meat, in excess of 500 grams weekly. So that's in excess of 3 or 4 times weekly. The majority of the world's population are not eating enough dairy and omega-3 rich foods. If we remove fresh meat, dairy and seafood from the diet, that will harm health. And it's women, children and the elderly and those of low income that will be most effective. So as a clinical doctor, I want animal source foods to be available for future generations, and therefore we must do that sustainably, which is in accordance with Jude's previous comments. And then possibly a call to action. Scientists, policymakers and all interested parties should be wary and should be calling out for all global health estimates that are used in decision making to be rigorously and transparently evidence-based. And we cannot allow them to ignore the protections against nutritional deficiencies afforded by animal source foods. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. We'll come to questions in the end. So, Sophie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. So it's really great to be here and to be enjoying another Beef Expo and to bringing lots of us together in the farming community to be here and to meet each other again after all those long years of COVID and to be back here in person. And as Neil referred to, we're also delighted to be sponsoring the event. It's really important for us all. So I'm I'm here to talk really from a Morrison's perspective about all the things that we've been doing for looking at what is sort of truly sort of sustainable. And I was just sort of looking, I had a bit of a surprise there because my slides were slightly out of date, or out of order. So I'm just going to set a bit of a context. So as Morrison's, as you'll know, we are a big supermarket chain, and also, as you'll know as well, we are very proud to be food makers as well as shopkeepers. So not only do we have our 400 and odd stores, but we also have around 20 manufacturing sites, including, of course, 3 abattoirs and 2 meat processing sites. Altogether, it makes us about the UK's largest fresh food manufacturer and British farming's biggest direct supermarket customer. And that's a position that we hold very proudly and a huge amount of respect for, but also a huge amount of responsibility for too. Because for us, we sort of really have that important balance, I think, about trying to understand how we make those translations between a sustainable sort of diet that customers are asking for and wanting about, and a sustainable and resilient farming industry. And so we have got several different things in our agriculture strategy, and I'm now not quite sure where these things are going to come in my slides, so I'm just going to talk through them. But we have 4 main pillars for our agriculture strategy, which is something that we go for 2030, and that's looking at nature-positive farming, which cares for the world around us. It looks at great stockmanship with high respect for animal welfare. It looks at how we can have agriculture financial resilience, because for all these things we can't be green if we're in the red, as this phrase goes. And importantly, about how we tell our story, how we use our position to make those bridging connections between customers and farmers and vice versa. One of the things I'm going to sort of concentrate on and talk through is all the work that we've been doing most recently about net zero. So net zero is a net zero agriculture, that sort of balance of making sure we can reduce our emissions as low as possible and increase our opportunities to sequester carbon as high as possible are really important, obviously, in the whole way we want to try and get to net zero. But it's also important for net zero not to be seen as an issue on its own. Net zero is something that must be done within the whole boundaries of a sustainable farming system, and it's that we're going to sort of talk a little bit about today. So our approach to net zero sort of goes through sort of four main pillars and four main routes. And the first one is about inspiration. So we're really conscious that when we say net zero and we talk about what we're wanting to try and do to sort of recognise the great work that's already been done in farming, however, some of the elements that we need to be able to lower our emissions as much as we can are going to take leaps in thought, leaps in science, and real system changes. And so we wanted to be able to try and put a little bit of our money behind some of those projects that we're doing to try and inspire innovation. So one of those projects we're doing is sponsoring a PhD in study at Queen's University in Belfast, looking at how we can potentially use seaweed as a way of a feed additive to try and help mitigate the effects of methane, really act as a bit of a Gaviscon for cow stomachs, really, and to settle down sort of methane production. We've also been looking quite creatively, and again from a really interesting idea one of our farmers brought to us, about how we can take potential food waste that we have within our manufacturing sites, and how we can take that food waste, in which case we started off looking at grapes that weren't going into our stores, and send those to be made to send those to insects to feed on, so we can start to sort of feed some hens that are coming into our laying hen production insects instead of soya in their diet. Not entirely, but by reducing that soya. So it's really trying to think about how we can think about things just a little bit differently, but also take a very circular, holistic view of the food system and how we can try and help influence and play our part within that. Oh, there we go. So sorry, this is where I was going to go at the beginning. So forgive me, I sort of like diving through. We'll just sort of go through here. So this is what I was talking about here, about sustainable farming and what this means about net zero. Here we go. So then the second, that's where it just sort of threw me slightly. So hopefully we'll just sort of catch up here. So the second element of net zero and our sort of approach to this is a second I, so about information. And how can we help support that journey to net zero? And I think it's really important that we think about idea sharing and knowledge and skills training as well, and training workshops. So we recognise and really know, and really most of the reasons we wanted to do our projects and looking at sort of like a holistic, sustainable farming system, is that farmers are doing already so much good work. There's lots and lots of good practice that's happening on farms. And actually, we're lucky to have one of our blueprint farmers with us. I think he was here before, but some brilliant work that's already been done on farms and how we can farm within a landscape. So certainly about sort of trying to look at how we can sort of look at the breeds that we have, but are they suited to the farm that we are inhabiting, and how can we use that whole farm approach to try and address the point of net zero. So for that reason, we've set up blueprint farms. But we also, importantly, are working with advisors as well. We at Morrison's are enthusiasts about trying to support the farming industry and play our part, but we're certainly not the experts. So it's about how can we bring different experts together to try and help support farmers on that journey to net zero. And so we're delighted to be working with lots of really fantastic vets and agronomists and nutritionists. But we also worked to set up the School of Sustainable Food and Farming at Harper University, which we've done in association with the NFU and with McDonald's as well, to try and set up a school where it not only can talk to students at Harper, and we chose Harper because lots and lots of farmers have already been there or know somebody who goes there, and it's important to have that student conversation, but most importantly, how do we also help support farmers who've long passed student days and have no desire to return there, but how can we sort of like put on different workshops and different seminars and different training programs to help support the farmers that are already within the industry to have consistency in messages. I think Jude talked a little bit earlier about there being so many different carbon footprint toolkits on the market. There really are, but there's also loads and loads of sometimes conflicting advice for farmers about how to approach sustainable farming and farming with the landscape. And so what we want to try and do is try and find a bit of clarity and cut through some of those messages and provide a bit of a clear approach. And I think, as Jude also mentioned too, we're very clear that there is no one right system. Despite the fact we have got a couple of blueprint farms, there's no one set path to farming. You know, it's whatever's going to be right for you on your farm, in your own environment, in your own landscape, with your own choice of breeds, and that's the most important thing to get right, to try and help get the knowledge and the baseline to understand how you can move forward. So for that reason, the third element that we had is about implementation. And so we can't measure what we can't monitor what we can't measure, and we can't therefore make progress. And so one of the things that we've worked really hard to do, and we've got about 150 farms who've now been carbon footprinting on their farms with us, is to try and help provide a bit of a baseline. So we, through Morrison's, have developed a tool with a company called Map of Ag, which is based a little bit on AgriCalc and a little bit on the carbon farm toolkit, with a few extra questions thrown in, to try and say, well, actually, how can we start to understand what's happening on each of the farms that are supplying into us? But importantly, for those farmers, what's the so what from that? You know, a carbon footprint is only a number, and that number can mean very little, really, unless you're actually taking that number and that information from that footprint to say, well, actually, what's important to me then? What am I going to concentrate on my farm? And so as part of that too, we've formed sort of a bit of a report, a KPI report that says, right, what's the so what from all of that? So you may not be able to see in detail on this slide, but for example, the KPI report looks at sort of common metrics in fertility, in health, in nutrition, in resource use efficiency, to try and say, well, if there's a threshold of a bit of a red, amber, green sort of threshold, where do you sit in your farm in all of those different thresholds? And therefore, we're not telling you what we want you to do, but what would you like to then feel that you want to focus on to help reduce your emissions footprint on farm? And it's certainly not always the case, but quite often a reduction in emissions can also mean an increase in profitability, because some of those things are about efficiency too. So we hope that this is a win-win situation. But it is about what gets measured gets done. But importantly, as we talked about, what's the right thing for you to do to be able to get behind for your farm, and we certainly don't want to be starting to ever tell farmers how to farm. So then the fourth element of what we sort of have within this whole balance of our approach for sustainable farming and moving forward is about incentivizing production to make a difference. And this is really important and something very new, something we're just talking about actually just here today. And we're just about to launch our own sustainable beef and lamb scheme for farmers. Now, we sort of really recognise that as Morrison's, we don't want to just go out and do things on our own for our own supply chain and not talk to anybody else. That's one of the reasons why we set up the School of Sustainable Food and Farming at Harper, you know, to try and understand how can we work within the industry to try and help make a difference for everybody to get behind. And so similarly, we're working with Red Tractor to provide this scheme through their new environment module, which they announced last year. So in return for this, you know, we are going to have a return for this. Beef and lamb producers are going to get free advice on carbon emissions and animal nutrition and biodiversity, as you can see here, including tree planting, and that means right tree, right place, right reason, not we'll be turning over all of our food production land. You know, we've got to think about how it's going to be right for you and your farm, but also landscape assessments and soils testing and how we can help make the most to try and improve that sort of ability for the farm to sequester more carbon. It's also going to include in time discounts on products and services to help on farm sustainability, but we're also going to start introducing payment premiums. And this is more when I appreciate sort of farmers can sort of start to think about how this has a direct financial benefit, because of course we've talked about how efficiency and profitability can also go in hand with emissions reduction. But we are going to start to pay a 10 pence a kilo premium for Morrison's contracted dairy beef finished under 18 months to a sustainable diet. And there will be schemes for sucklers and store finishers production announced later this year as well. This is never about one system being the only system. It's about everything being a potential to be able to improve. But if we sort of talk back, and I'll just see if I can flick back a few slides, because when I was got a little bit thrown when the slide was just out of order there. You know, some of the things that I talked about earlier, and when I was just sort of summarising our overall plan, was about those building connections and how we can sort of try and show customers the fantastic work that already happens on British farms. So how can we sort of start to build that into something customers can understand? And we feel that, you know, we can talk about net zero, but no customer really understands the words net zero or carbon neutral, and we know because we've asked them about it. You know, it doesn't mean anything. However, we can start to tell a story about the great work that already British agriculture does and is increasingly doing about that commitment to continually improve the landscape that we live in and continue to care for our animals. You know, that is something that does resonate with customers. Because as a retailer, you know, the most important thing for us is about the customer themselves. At the end of the day, we are a customer-facing business. We only exist if customers come in through the door and buy the products that are on our shelves and engage with us and want to be part of us. And yes, of course, a certain amount of it is wherever you shop, which supermarket is near to you and has some good prices. However, there is also other things that customers do care about. And we know that there is the potential to be able to really speak to those customers more about what's happening. And so some of our role as well is about, you know, so I often get asked, well, are customers really bothered? Are they going to change their habits? Are they going to shop differently? And how do we engage our customers? And so I just wanted to show you a little bit of work we do within the business to think about, well, actually, what does matter to customers? And so, as we just described, and many of us maybe can identify this ourselves with our shopping habits. You know, we may go somewhere that's near and convenient to us, but also customers do care a lot about other things as well. We survey them every year, specifically to ask them what matters to them, and ensuring food safety is always up there as number one, but increasingly importantly, and I think really relevant for this audience, is about customers' desire to support British farmers. And I think it's really interesting too, if you notice the years of the survey reported here, customers have particularly responded to the efforts that British farming made within the COVID pandemic, you know, where farmers kept farming, they kept on going, they kept on producing food onto the table for customers to be able to go eat and enjoy. And I think that support and that sort of admiration for British farmers is something that customers do understand increasingly. They also have other things that they really care about, obviously, but it's about how we can then sort of help get over that story of British farming. I just wanted to leave you with the main example of how we've done this in the past. And so back in 2015, we launched at Morrison's a range of products under the For Farmers brand. And we did that to sort of ask customers, if they wanted to be able to pay 10p a litre more for milk or a penny an egg more for eggs, to be able to support farmers and to be able to add a little bit more onto their shop. And since we started that, we've passed back £20 million to British farmers since 2015 when that scheme started, and this was last year, so it's going to be a lot higher now. So it's certainly able for us to be able to help communicate that story, to make a difference to customers, to give customers what it is that they want to buy, but importantly for us, to be able to help continue our sort of journey into sustainable agriculture and to things that really make a difference. And so, you know, as a summary, we, as we talked about, are a retailer. We're primarily a customer-facing and answering business, but we are incredibly proud of our position as British farming's biggest direct supermarket customer. You know, it is a really big responsibility, but also a big proud position. But we do recognise that actually we all need to work together and within the industry and within each other to help to address the climate emergency and sustainable production. We can't get there alone. We can't get there in only our supply chain. But what we can do is work together to understand how we can all make a difference in informing, innovating and encouraging change. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, we'll just go to open questions in a second, but before that, while my voice is still hanging on it, I think as producers in the industry, we often always feel that the world is against us, and everything is always pushing against us. I think we've heard, and I'm going to just do it in the order the ladies are sat at the table, we can change the way we produce things, and we can produce beef more sustainably. it's not bad for you. In fact, quite the contrary. And we've got a major British retailer at the end who's quite happy to buy it. So it's not all negative. It's not all about pushing water uphill. And there's a lot of people out there fighting the case for that. And I think we've got to try and expand on the positive messages and not be negative all the time. And without trying to antagonise anything, I just wonder if the seminar voices have reached the roof. So, questions, please. Right, Caitlin, Ben, right in the middle there.
I've got a couple, if you'll permit, please, Neil.
Pardon?
I've got a couple of questions, if you'll permit, please.
Absolutely, crack on.
So first, Jude, that 20,000 litres of water, what does that actually mean? Mm-hmm. And B, and it's a slightly different forum, but do you have an equivalent amount of water that would take to produce a litre of nut juice as would do a litre of cow's milk?
It's a really good question. So in that instance, because it's suckler cows, that's simply drinking water. It isn't water for irrigation, so on and so on. And in a lot of the global figures that you see, where it says it takes, 11 billion gazillion gallons of water per kilo of beef, or whatever it may, a high proportion of that is irrigation water, which of course it isn't applicable over here. It sounds like an awfully big number, but actually in context it isn't that big, and particularly when you consider how much of that is streams, rainfall, etc., etc. It isn't taking it out of a sort of metropolitan reservoir that would instead be supplying people most of the time. I don't have the figures for nut juice or any other of the alternatives, but generally speaking, particularly for almonds, for example, almond production in the States, mainly from California, uses a heck of a lot of water, and from a nutritional point of view, as was alluded to by Alice earlier, the nutritional composition of almond juice compared to milk, for example, is absolutely tiny. So when we put all that into perspective, and when we consider that the vast majority of the water consumption for suckler beef is basically from rainfall, we don't have a damaging environmental story. But as I say, most of the articles that you'll see in The Guardian, for example, will concentrate on there is a global beef system, everything's finished on corn and everything's irrigated, in the belief that every farm is the same. And of course they're all, very, very different, as all of us have said, I think.
Thanks, Jude. Professor Stanton, that was awesome. Thank you for that. There was a lot of detail in there, and there was some stuff there that I would love to take forward to different forums. Is your presentation available anywhere so we can have another look?
I'm very, very happy to share the slides, and I think this is being recorded, so that's available, and I'll provide a PDF for distribution to anyone who requests it.
And we'll coordinate that, Ben, if needed, absolutely. The more that message gets out, the better for everyone involved in the industry, I think.
And lastly, then, for Sophie, sustainable diet. There's 10 pence extra for animals fed on the sustainable diet. What does that mean?
So we just are conscious, we have a lot of questions that are asked from us about from various different stakeholders and shareholders and communities, which also include our other elements of footprint. So we were just conscious about sustainable diets means, for example, we didn't want to think we're just going to have dairy beef sort of killed at a younger age, but fed on soya diet, which is coming from a deforestation risk area, for example. So it's about how can we make very conscious choices about, what that diet looks like. So a sustainable diet is really trying to say, well, actually, can we sort of look at the homegrown diet? Can we look at grass-fed? Can we look at pasture-based? Can we look at responsibly sourced grains as well? Because we do have farmers who are already doing that. So we know we're not sort of setting a parameter which is there for people to fail. We have farmers who are already delivering that now. We want to be able to sort of recognise those, but also give others an opportunity to follow.
Thank you.
So, Caitlin, round. Abby, please, and then we'll come to the gentleman here.
Thanks very much to all of the panel. It's been a fascinating session. Professor Stanton, just a quick question to you. We're increasingly seeing local councils, local education authorities trying to cut meat out of diets, and I just wondered what your profession or what route your profession might be taking to communicate to them that this might not be the best idea.
Yeah, I think this is why we have initiated the discussion within the medical literature, because those councils who are commissioning school meals are hearing the data. So it's really dangerous if the Global Burden of Disease 2019 analysis actually starts to influence policymakers and national dietary guidelines, and with impact on sourcing of school meals and other sort of publicly commissioned foods. So I think it is up to all of us to actually highlight that actually we should not be relying on data that is not evidence-based. And unless we challenge this, there will be more and more of these dietary guidelines or commissioning of food that excludes, in particular, red meat, but also there is a move against all animal source foods. We need to use reliable data for all of our decisions.
Okay, thanks. Caitlin, John at this end.
Thank you, Chairman, and congratulations to the whole panel for a fascinating presentation, and to you, Chairman, for initially mentioning the importance of positivity. It's absolutely vital that we start talking in a very positive nature, and following on from the last question, you know, very much about education. The real question to the panel is, what do we do to get the Professor Stanton's message to the political world, to the powers that be, to recognise that the real issue is the school curriculum. There's nothing in there about the importance of the values of foods, the cooking of foods. You know, we have lost that totally. And we have lost it through a time of plenty, when everybody's been able to speak about their fantasies of food and forgetting about animal production in a time when there has been plenty and people have been speaking with full stomachs. The world is facing a very fragile situation, you know, and, you know, basically governments haven't wakened up to this yet. Many governments do not have a strategy to deal with the challenges that we're facing, and basically, you know, the government dealing with the retailers. The retailers have been a panacea to governments for many years, sort of dealing with the mass production of food, keeping a lid on inflation. It's been a wonderful panacea for the government, having retailers that have been fighting among themselves to keep food prices low. That is over. We've got to face reality and the positivity of the importance of our industry in producing food for the nation. And when we go into the retailers, we walk down many aisles where there's now aisle after aisle after aisle of ready-made meals full of packaging, etc., and all the rest of it. Professor Stanton, just maybe a touch on that, of what is the salt base? You know, we know we can pick the packets up and look, but when we look at the salt base of that against the fresh food market, if people were taught to cook, you know, what are the differences there? So how do we get to the governments and get the real message over of the challenge that is coming down the line in many ways? Thank you.
Right, thank you. Right, let's just going to take a bit of cheering. I'm going to give all the ladies a chance to answer how we get a positive message out, and the message to government. Then we'll come to Alice on the question on ready meals, and then I'll maybe have an opinion on how we get the message out too. So we're going to start at that end with Sophie, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, as Ruth says, you're quite right. We do actually have access to government. We're not lobby organisations, of course, but we are obviously part of various different councils and groups. And certainly for our part, we want to sort of make sure we can do as much as we possibly can to represent our own position about farming and the importance of sort of like, in our case, buying British and making sure we have a resilient food system. We also are, of course, mindful about cost of living, and also we do know at the moment, we have an incredibly difficult situation where the cost of inputs are astronomically high and the cost of living crisis is really biting, and so it's a very, very challenging place to be indeed. However, it is our role to be able to be that sort of fair voice and to try and keep listening with our farmers, keep listening to our customers, and to try and sort of like tread that sort of careful line in between, but also to do as much as we can to represent the situation to government, but also to work within industry bodies as well. So we're part of British Retail Consortium. We work very closely as well, and we have sort of very good relationships with the NFU and with HDB and others as well to try and understand how we can act with a common voice. And so, we also just take up invitations. So I've been invited, for example, to speak with DEFRA's agri-food team in a couple of weeks about our position, about our opinions, and, it's a great opportunity to be able to sort of help represent. I just was touch your elements that you talked about in terms of education. I think it's really interesting. We have worked again with the NFU, who've got some brilliant materials under their STEMterprise programme, which is about how you sort of try and introduce farming and food into the curriculum. And before the pandemic started, we started a programme called Dr. Farm, where each of our local stores were starting to be encouraged to work with a local farmer, to be able to work with them to do school visits and to put on school visits and to follow the journey literally from farm to fork, from the farm and into the store as well. And so now post-pandemic, hopefully we may be able to go into more of those times too. And we've got other elements of trying to improve the connectivity as well at the same time that we're working on too. But it's certainly not one person's role alone, but it is something really important that we, as you say, get those messages out. And I think, we do have a different position in Morrison's, having all of our market street counters and a high proportion of fresh food and meat that we sell. So, that's something, again, which is very important to our identity and to our customer base as well.
Sophie, thank you. Alice, do you want to?
Yeah, on both points, I think it goes back to the last point on my slide, that actually all of us need to call out for use of the correct data, both in terms of impact of food on human health and impact of food production on the environment and the whole picture of sustainability. So I think everyone, the scientists, the medics, the industry, so the farmers and everyone along the food value chain, including the retailers, need to say, we need evidence. And I think everyone should write to the Lancet, to Professor Richard Horton, and say, tell global burden of disease to produce the evidence. Your comment on ultra-processed foods and ready-made meals, yeah, it is a disaster for human health that in the Western world now, 70% of calories are coming from ultra-processed food. As you said, huge links with, well, it's not even links, it's people will be eating far more salt and sugar. And the link between ultra-processed food and obesity is absolutely proven. With the rise of ultra-processed food intake, obesity levels have gone up exponentially, and there are actually sort of randomized trials which show that if you're 4 weeks on an ultra-processed food diet, your weight goes up, you eat 500 calories more per day. It's just undeniable. It's unsure why that is happening. There are aspects of salt, sugars, taste, sort of hitting the sweet spot that actually drives demand for more calories. There also are probably impacts on the gut microbiome, causing disadvantageous effects, that actually your gut bugs don't like the ultra-processed foods, so they don't eat it, so actually more goes into you. Is a possibility, but that's an absolute fact. We actually need more whole foods, both animal sourced and plant sourced. So it's a balanced diet. Yes, you absolutely should be eating your 5 portions or more of fruit and vegetables every day.
Right, Alice, thank you. Jude?
Really, I'm just balancing on what the other two ladies have said, but I think we do, and I say this carefully, need to take a leaf out of the activists' book. And I don't mean we go and stand on the roof wearing balaclavas and shouting and swearing at everyone that comes into the building. But the activist groups well know that the more voices they get, the less politicians can ignore them. And they know that if they get all of their followers to tweet out, you know, meat is murder on a Monday, it gets more likes and more retweets than one organisation saying, you know, on behalf of our 10,000 members, we think meat is murder, for example. So it's often very tempting for all of us to say, that's HDB's job, that's the NFU's job, that's the National Beef Association's job. As individuals, given that our livelihoods depend on it, we need to be doing stuff, we need to be talking to politicians, talking on social media, all of us getting our friends to do it, getting our family to do it as well, because that's exactly what the activists do, and that's how they get the messages out there. And in terms of education, I couldn't agree more that we need to be in schools. We're very lucky in our village that we have a sheep farm. My daughter's gone every year, apart from the couple of years when we've had COVID. And the kids love it. They talk about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And even the ones who have no ag background at all, they go, oh, there was this sheep and she had a baby and it came out of its bottom and it was disgusting and there was poo. But they love it because they're little and it's exciting and there's poo everywhere, you know? And if we can harness that excitement and that enthusiasm, given that we now have the sort of Instagram generation for which food is cool and sexy and you take a picture of a cheeseburger, it looks amazing and you post a photo of it, which I wasn't doing, you know, 20 odd years ago. We need to harness that and get that early on and keep people excited about those choices, because frankly, a vegan sausage in a bun doesn't take a very nice picture, generally speaking, unless you put a lot of other stuff on it. So we've got to get kids excited about this and then keep that going on into the future and get them talking to policymakers as well.
Right, Jude, thank you. So there's maybe not much left for me how to add to that. I think we all wait with interest for the government's response to the Dimble report, because there could be a lot of key factors in there. I think as organisations, individually and collectively, we can prove that collaboration works. All you need for confirmation of that, you just need to look at Ukraine. So if everyone sticks together, you can get a good result. And I think the key thing we need to do as an industry, absolutely collectively, is spread the positive message and counteract misinformation. That's the key, rather than throwing stones back in the same direction. So that's what we will be doing, and try and get the positive message out here. So I ask, once these videos, they're edited, they're on YouTube, we share them globally, we get all the likes, and we use that to get our message out. So, next question.
Thank you for some very interesting talks. Professor Stanton, the people behind the Global Burden of Disease study, who are they? They're making errors. Do they have conflicts of interest? Are they forgetful? You know, is there corruption? What's going on, do you think?
Okay, one of my co-authors on the letter is Frederick Leroy, who's an expert on networks within the food industry. So there actually is an article published in The Lancet, I think in 2018, which describes the relationships of the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluations in University of Washington. And there appears to be a 4-party coalition. So they are funded to hundreds of millions of dollars by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have a contractual relationship with the WHO. The WHO has agreed that they will use their data rather than generate their own data. And there is a mutual relationship, and this was published in the Lancet, with the Lancet itself, that the Lancet actually gets its citation index, which is it's an evaluation which actually determines how much money it earns. So 10% of its citation index comes from global burden of disease publications, which is huge for one institute from one American university in the world to account for 10% of a major medical journal's citation index. And so that's helpful to the Lancet. And the Lancet actually, in this article, actually said, yeah, we guarantee global burden of disease publications. No one else has an automatic right to publication. All of the rest of us have to go through peer review process, and if our articles aren't good enough, they don't get published. And usually less than 10% of submitted articles to the Lancet would get published.
Thank you. Alice, right, I'm having a look. Yes, gentleman at the back.
Yeah, it's just an observation. I mean, the reality is that the government has an obsession with the price of food and the carbon footprint. So, yes, we all have to collaborate and work together, but that's small beer compared to delivering as an industry on those points. So we have to drive down and produce affordable food, and we have to reduce the carbon footprint. And if we don't, because there's not many votes in the countryside anymore, the votes are in the urban areas, and we have to address those issues. And if we don't, then the other parts won't contra against those. And it's not just about Ukraine causing a grain shortage and driving up the price of gas, which affects fuel costs. And that's not just about fertilizer costs going up this year and people looking more to mixed farming. We've got to go back to those two things. As an industry, we have to drive down our carbon footprint, because that is what the government is saying. Because there is no obvious support from the government for agriculture currently. I certainly don't hear any.
Well, I didn't make the whole of the first seminar, but I think the first seminar was looking at that, and maybe what we can say is that there's a massive opportunity there for some carrots to be dangled to achieve environmental goals, create a more efficient industry and deliver food. I think it's all there to be connected if possible. While I've got the mic, I'm going to throw my question to Sophie. We're obviously very excited about dairy beef getting a 10p premium if they're finished on a sustainable diet under 18 months. Suckler beef, 25?
I'm not going to negotiate your prices over the table, Neil. But yeah, certainly this isn't, as we sort of talked about having only one sort of like system. But we're also making sure that we want to make sure we make the right incentive choice too. So when we look, for example, at store finishes and a lot of the work that we've done so far, you know, there's so many things that store finishes, you know, are less able to influence in terms of lowering their carbon footprint, that it makes you sort of work. We just have to be very conscious about what is the incentive, therefore, that's right. You know, we can't just take a blunt tool for everybody. So we're just going to work a little bit harder with the experts that we work with and the vets that we're working with to make sure we get the incentive and the premium right for store finishes and also for sucklers as well. So it's not that it's not there, it's that we just want to make sure we make the right decision and get that to come forward.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It was partly tongue-in-cheek. We won't quote it. No,
I like your style.
We'll ask the press not to put that in. So, right, have we any further questions? Obviously, it's lunchtime. So, right, before we leave, absolutely last call, no more questions? No. On behalf of the MBA, I would like to really thank the leading ladies that I see in agriculture at the moment for their contribution today. And can we just put your hands together one more time for their efforts?